This is A Lost Plot, the podcast where we explore meaning in movies together. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot. I am your host, Maverick, here back again with our regular Avalon. Avalon, thanks for coming back around.
Hello, hola, konnichiwa, and reho.
Now, today we are reviewing the most recent release and well-renowned, well-expected movie from Martin Scorcese. It's Killers of the Flower Moon, released in 2023. This is the epic Western crime drama film. It had a lot of other titles in there from some people, depending on who you looked at. I don't know. It had a lot of people really anticipated this one, that's for sure. Anyways, Screenplay is by our very own Martin Scorsese and Eric Roth, as well as directed by Martin Scorsese. It's based on the book of the same name, and it stars Leonardo DiCaprio as Ernest Burkhart, Robert De Niro as William King Hale, and Lily Gladstone as Molly Burkhart, among other actors and actresses. But before we get into the details, Avalon, why don't you give us a little rundown on what you think Killers of the Flower Moon is about?
Killers of the Flower Moon is it's about the Osage Nation. It's the Indian.
It was like the Osage or something like that.
Osage, Osage. Yeah, I'm sorry. The Osage Indian tribe in I guess it's Oklahoma.
Yeah,
like, that's where it's from. I don't know if it's explicitly ever said in the movie.
No, it is. It is in Oklahoma. Yeah,
but yeah, it's about the Osage Nation, and they have oil rights, some of them, and a series of murders takes place in this town, particularly these Indian people, and then it just creates this climate of fear and terror, and it eventually leads to the investigation of the FBI and others into these murders, what's going on. So yeah, I mean and I'm kind of skewing the story with that synopsis because it isn't exactly about that. There's more going. It's actually more on the other side, like the criminal side of it, not actually the innocent side.
Yeah, this story is interesting because it follows Ernest, who's following the will of his uncle, and his uncle is clearly a bad man, right? Without giving away spoilers at the beginning, if you guys have not seen this movie, as always, give it a watch if you want to not get the spoilers. Otherwise, you're gonna get all the full details here today. Another note on my end, which I thought was interesting, just looking into this movie before we give the reviews. This is a nonfiction story, so it's based on actual occurrences, and many of the characters are actual existing characters or existing people. So, the granddaughter of Molly Burkhart lives today. And that's like, so it's kind of crazy to think about that all these things did actually happen. The Reign of Terror is what it was called for the Osage Indians in Oklahoma. Like these were real events. And it sounds like, from what I understand, that a lot of the events did occur. Whether they occurred exactly how they showed in the movie is I'm not sure. But we'll get into that. Anyways, overall, Avalon, what did you give this one?
So I'm going to start off by saying that there was a few points on here I couldn't give I was going back and forth on some rating points. So it's possible that my score will change by the end of this podcast. I'm just, but at the same time, I had deep problems with some things, so I see also going very negative, possibly. But where it is now is 5.4, which is about middle of the road.
No, my rating is a solid 6.
Okay.
And I'm very conflicted about my not very conflicted about my rating. Ultimately, I think it's where it belongs, but it took me a long time to get to that. Just thinking through this movie, thinking about what went on, thinking about everything that goes on here. So it was a lot of internal wrangling, which in some ways might say, oh, there is extra value in it just in regards to you having to do that, right? anyways, well, let's get into it. So the opening scene, and I don't know. Let's just get into it. I'm gonna get to that point eventually. I have so many things going on in my head that I think I just want to say, but it doesn't make sense
Okay.
if you don't. Anyways, so let's see what's going on here. The opening scene. Did you feel like that opening prayer where they bury the pipe and then they get into the world with Ernest getting off the train and all that good stuff? How did you think about that opener?
I'm gonna be honest. I mean, it's very hard for me to remember that opening because this is a very long movie. I mean, I'd
True.
only barely remembered some of those scenes, and it just
Hmm.
was like I don't remember being intrigued. I don't remember being engaged in those opening scenes. Like,
Sure.
not really. It was kind of like okay, interesting, kind of, and then as the movie progressed, I just lost interest and kind of got bored in the first half hour to hour of the movie. So I
Interesting.
really wasn't impressed by the beginning of this movie.
Okay.
Like I felt like I lost interest and just it became a very stale, like slow, like progression. Like it wasn't clear where it was going or what was happening. It just I didn't know what was going on. Like what are we seeing here?
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, aside from like, it wasn't until later in the movie as things began to progress, that things began to pick up a little bit more, and then you began, okay, I kind of see where the story is going now. But at the first half
Interesting.
hour, I didn't know where the movie was going. Like, I was lost. Like, okay, I see these elements in play. I'm not clear on motivations, goals, what's exactly going on.
Sure, sure. And
So,
that is a little bit later, but definitely I agree with that.
so,
The so I did give it points at the beginning that it made me want to keep watching. That being said, I was more personally struck by the undertones of things. And so especially because a lot of um and maybe this is just something that I pick up on, so I'm really intrigued by it. But anytime there is this idea of religious reverence or something tied into
hmm,
something at the beginning of a movie, it sticks out to me because then you have some sort of baseline of rules that aren't necessarily equal across groups, right?
hmm,
And a lot of frankly Marvel movies that exist today with no they have no baseline of what people should interact based on, right? Like this is what we do because it's just what I feel like, rather than the very beginning they say, okay, we have these ways that we live our lives and we are burying this, we are giving this up to adapt to the white man's ways. And
hmm.
then you see that further played out later in the movie. So I thought that was an intriguing start to begin with. Um, but I did think about this a lot because yeah, it doesn't. After that, you have Ernest come on the train, and it was okay, and then it kind of does. Honestly, what happens in The Blind, which is an ironic comparison to make right here, but it takes like a long time to get engaged, right?
Hmm.
And there was several times where I was thinking, okay, well, if they had just cut out up to this point and then did a little homage montage of some sort, you would have cut out 30 minutes, an hour and 15, you know,
Hmm.
out of the movie. So this wasn't a 3.5 hour long movie.
Hmm.
Now, uh, if that
Well, I don't.
time was well used, that would be okay. But it was so slow going on that I found it hard to justify. The character development at some points was critical, but even
Mhm.
those could have been a little more tightly
Mm.
squished together.
I think there are definitely things in the beginning of the movie that were important for later on, especially Ernest and Molly's relationship. Like
For
showing
sure.
that development was important because it kind of gave a because let's face it, you could have rushed that, but it would have made the relationship feel less genuine. Like it would have been harder for
Yeah.
the audience to feel what was going on later on in the movie when there was actual conflicts going on.
Right.
By creating showing the development of the relationship, it was kind of important. But you're right. There was aside from that, there's a lot of things shown, a lot of things going on. That's like, okay, why are we seeing this? I almost got the impression that it was like this movie is part documentary, like trying to show us like Indian, like the
Uh
Osage
huh.
nation's
Hmm.
ways. And I'm like, if that's what you want to go, then you should have made a documentary. If that's what you really
Yeah.
want to do about this, and to be honest, this story could have made a good documentary. Like, it is
Oh,
good
for
documentary
sure.
material. But I
For
mean,
sure.
clearly they want to tell a narrative, and they were trying to. And there are some good actors, there are some good elements, and things like that. And we'll get into that. But it just, I got the impression they could just like they also wanted to incorporate all this like uh introduction, like all this Native American stuff into the movie as well, just like to give you an idea of their life and ways. And it's like, okay, well, if you wanted to do that, you should have made a documentary.
Well, so to push back on that a little bit, I
Mm-hmm.
agree a lot with what you're saying, but
Mm-hmm.
I think those elements can still be part of it. There
Oh no, they could be
are,
still be a part of it, yeah,
but they
but they
have to be
focus too
relevant to the
long on
story.
it. But they focus, yeah, they
Right.
relevant, and they focus too long on some of those elements, other elements in the movie.
There are parts like, the Osage don't talk to people very much. They think it's they let the white man run his mouth, right, excuse me,
Mm-hmm.
um, and they just listen and they don't talk too much, and that's part of their traits. And then they have other things where they don't trust people because they know that they're out to get their money. And they even say that about Ernest. Molly knows that he's there for her money, but she
Mm-hmm.
still feels like there's something special about him, so she marries him anyways. There's yeah, a couple different things that are definitely valuable that they play out. And that's just one example among many. But yeah, like there were some slow pan demonstrations, especially later on, where they showed, this is cutting way ahead, but when they showed the murders after describing the murders, totally unnecessary. Do one or the other, or if you must, do them both at the same time. But the fact that you have to take
Mm-hmm.
the time to do one, then take the time to do the other, like extended this movie that was already eons long, so that
Yeah.
you're giving Lord of the Rings extended edition a run for its money. Like, what are we doing here? No one watches the extended edition unless they're nerds, and I am a nerd, and I say that myself. Like, there are times where you don't want to sit down for 3.5 hours to watch a movie, so make it worth it.
Yep.
Anyways, well, and so let's talk about that. On in regards to the middle, because there's a lot that goes on in a 3.5 hour long movie. Did they
Mm-hmm.
do well at keeping you engaged? Was the conflict and suspense built up consistently so you were tied in? How do you feel they did in regards to that?
Yes and no. There was an like as the movie progressed, they did bring some elements into it which made me more interested in the plot, like what was happening. Like I became a little bit more. I wasn't bored after a certain point. I was like, okay, what's happening? Like what? Like you're
Right.
kind of following the plot a little bit, and even as they start to explain things, it's like they introduce something else to keep you engaged, kind of. At the
Hmm.
same time, like I don't know, like I don't think I was fully engaged. In fact, evidence to well, full disclaimer here, I actually left to go to the bathroom partway through this movie because of how long it was. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that I felt like I could do that was like, okay, I really wasn't that engaged, like completely engaged with this movie because I was able to do that partway through the movie.
So this is definitely a movie that, before we get into more spoilers, I am no I'm not sad that I watched this movie. I
Okay,
found it
yeah.
very interesting.
Hmm.
I find it fascinating that this actually happened.
Hmm.
I don't see myself dedicating 3.5 hours to watching this movie again. And so I think that the way that Scorsese builds it up
Hmm.
and adds that suspense was very good. For me, I gave it not full points in regards to that, but close to full points.
Hmm.
And the reason for that is when they really get into it, they really grab you.
Hmm.
It's literally just that beginning part where they take so long to develop things to let you know who the characters are and how they're feeling and what they're doing and all that stuff. It's really hard. And so here's what you said earlier, right? And this is all I could think about when I was thinking about this movie, trying to figure out what I even thought about it. Right? It has the beginning, which is all about the Osage, the Indians, right? And then they have the other half that's all about the the FBI,
Hmm.
basically. And there's a little bit of space in the middle, but mostly the whole movie has these two sections. And each section, kind of by itself, could be a movie, right? Because you have the
Kind
crime
of.
drama, you have the like almost romantic relationship aspect slash concerning murderous aspect of the beginning part, and then on the other side you have the fast-paced cat and mouse investigative murder that's going on there. And you could almost say that there's a cat and mouse game on both sides, the cat and mouse just flipping who's the cat and who's the mouse halfway through.
Hmm.
But it's almost like both sides are so distinct, they could each be their own movie. And with the amount of time they have, they could be their own movies. But the main thing that keeps it all together is the main character and his wife, Molly and
Hmm.
Ernest. And so
Yeah.
if those weren't the main characters, it would be the equivalent of two movies. But they're such a
Hmm.
strong part of this whole thing that it keeps a cohesive line that makes it arguably one movie. Does that thought
Hmm.
process make sense?
I see it. I would say it's a little bit more than that. I mean, because let's face it, like the uncle is a big part of it too. So is some of the other family
King.
members, like yeah, and Byron and some other characters in the movie. It just is like they're such prevalent forces. It's like in both parts, you kind of can't like. So it is one overarching storyline. And maybe it's not so much two stories as it is. How do you say it? Maybe it's like two. Well, maybe it is. It's like maybe two worlds. I guess I don't know. Like I guess like it's a glimpse of two different ideas or two different world views. I don't know.
Well, yeah, there is a lot about worldviews for sure in this.
Hmm.
Did you? Well, so even getting into that, the main character,
Hmm.
Ernest, he's a flawed character, you would say, right?
Hmm. No, I would say as far as character the movie goes, Ernest is probably one of the best things about this movie. I mean, it's Leonardo
Yes.
DiCaprio, so I mean, he's an excellent actor, so he has to
Yeah.
like he generally does a good job. So like he actually is one of the main points of this movie that's actually a fairly good job. He portrays this character who's I mean, he's not smart. He's not necessarily like the
Right.
smartest guy in the room, but he's trying to do his best in a way. Where it's like he's trying to
Yeah. Yeah. No,
where it's like
you're
he's
you're
trying to
right.
please his uncle, he's trying to please his wife, he's trying to do his job well. But at the same time, it's
Yeah.
like all these other fact things are pulling at him, and I think he kind of knows that some of it's conflicting against each other, so he's hiding it from. It's like he's living a double life, and he's trying to hide it, like keep it separate, like trying
Yeah.
to keep it from crossing over if he can, because he
Right.
knows deep down that it's wrong, but it like as the movie progresses, it gets harder and harder for him to hide it.
Yeah, and it starts to affect him personally more and more,
Hmm.
and that's definitely a um. No, you're absolutely right, and he tries to hide it more and more as time goes on, but it gets harder and harder, right? So
Hmm.
I think that it's interesting to see him play out. I also thought it was funny just because Leonardo DiCaprio generally has played some pretty quick-witted, smart guys, such as the Wolf of Wall Street, or playing as the guy in Inception, who I can't think of right now, Cobb. And then
Yeah,
you
Cobb.
have, even as the guy in Titanic, he's pretty clever. But then you have this guy, and he's very much a departure from that. He's a simple man living his
Hmm.
simple life, just really trying to
Hmm.
make it in the world. So yeah, it was kind of funny to just see
Yeah,
such a different character that he played, and he played it very well.
yeah.
Anyways, well, I mean, the other thing that's interesting about Leonardo DiCaprio's character is that he's not a good guy, right? And
Hmm.
so, what
No.
makes this movie unique compared to a lot of other movies is you're not dealing with a protagonist. You're not or well, you are dealing with the protagonist, but you're not dealing with a good guy. You're not even dealing with an anti-hero. You're dealing with the villain in some ways. And it's hard to he does have a little bit of a like an arc, so it's not completely clean
Hmm.
on there, but objectively he's doing bad things for bad reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And he's sort of in the same lines as like Yagami, who goes back and forth a little bit, but ultimately chooses evil, or even Ebenezer Scrooge, who's a bad guy and then turns good. He's in the
Mm-hmm.
same vein of those kinds of characters who definitely are not going down a good path and are then faced with options and opportunities to change that. Right.
Yeah.
So that's where the story is about. It means that he's definitely got compelling flaws. He's got things going for him in regards to that, but does he act on those? Ultimately, and that's the question of the movie. So,
Mm-hmm.
moving on. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I just was going to say that he explicitly admits at one point he loves money, where it's like he does pursue like financial gain and what his own selfish desires. So it's like from the get go, he's not like a selfless guy or anything like that. Though
No.
the only thing that works in his favor is that he legitimately seems to care about Molly. Like
Yeah,
even though he's
and
this
his
bad guy,
family.
like yeah, he does care, and it's like, and he does argue at a few points, like wait, like for Molly, like he cares about her. He shows to his uncle that like yeah, she matters to him, and he doesn't want anything bad to happen to her.
No, you're absolutely right, and that's what makes him redeeming, which is
Mm-hmm.
interesting because it. I almost feel like more characters should have good traits like that because it makes it doesn't justify them, but then it makes the tension in the movie so much more palpable, like it
Mm.
was in this one, where the character really has these struggles, especially for him as the main character, where he has to figure out where that line is. Anyways, the as a character, is the side characters also compelling?
I think the side characters were some of them were very fully developed. Like you got
Mhm.
an impression of desires, goals, and other things. Um, Maybe not all of them, but it's hard to say. Like some of them, like they all have enough development to pass for human.
Right.
So like there wasn't like a character that stood out. I was like, oh, that's a cardboard cutout, or that was like, oh, that's
No,
a
no.
person like you wouldn't see like the typical Disney plus acting that's looks like so fake and looks like oh like they're just reading off their lines. No, like these characters sound like they're living in the moment. Like they look like people as you'd find them on
Yeah,
the street.
yeah.
So
Someone was
like
listening
there's
to my rant the other day. I see. Someone in this chat room may or may not like Ahsoka. We'll say that. Anyways, keep going.
okay. That's all I had to say about that.
No, I think you're right. I think that Scorsese did very well at creating the world, and you better for and the characters, and you better for the amount of time you spent on it because it's 3.5 hours. So it better be a freaking good backstory for every character. And he honestly did very good. The characters that don't really have that backstory don't really even need it, and even characters that didn't really need that much of a backstory ended up getting some, like was it Henry Smith or the Osage Indian that gets shot later in the movie, who they get drunk.
oh,
I forget what his name is,
I
but
know I know
he
about
gets a
like
backstory, and he's not
yeah.
really like a critical character, but you learn a lot about
Well,
where
I
he
mean,
came
he's
from, and
not. I mean, he is a critical character, but not in the way you'd expect. Where it's like he kind of is used to create a possibility of division between Molly and
oh yeah,
Ernest.
yeah, yeah.
So
Well,
it's like
yeah,
when Ernest finds out, and this is actually just another point I had on my list. You're talking about revelations or something in the movie. Like I don't know if there's any like full like revelations that change the story. This is the closest one I found, where it's like
hmm
uh, he like finding out that she had a first husband before Ernest, and it was this guy, this
right,
melancholic guy who wants to kill himself.
right, and that
so
happens in like the middle of the movie too. It's not
yeah,
even near the end.
yeah, and it's like, and there's a conflict of interest there, where it's like the uncle wants to keep the Indian around because he has insurance money that he'll get if
Yeah,
the guy survives till the end of the year or something.
sorry, I should
Whereas,
laugh at that.
but Ernest is like uncomfortable now with the idea of this guy who used to be married to his wife.
And that is emphasized because there's concern that potentially he would have a claim on her money. So that was the whole reason why he was especially concerned. And because he said at the beginning, "Oh, I love money," and that's what he wants, that's his driving motivation. And so you see that that's what drives the actions that he takes moving forward. The Was there a lot at stake for Ernest if they didn't get the life that he wanted, or if he didn't achieve his goal?
I mean, in a way, yes. I mean, the movie kind of shows that, where it's like he loses everything by the end of the movie. I mean, just jumping ahead, but
Right.
I mean, in a way, he does lose everything because he fails. He doesn't win.
Spoilers. Oh wait, yeah.
But I don't know. I'm conflicted. This is one of those things I was a little conflicted about. I'm not sure if the movie showed fully well what Ernest's goals were. I guess maybe it's just me, but it's just like I felt like a little conflicted on this point, where it's like I knew a little bit. Like obvious, like, it wasn't completely clear. Like, does he actually want money? Is he doing this for himself, or is he doing it because his uncle told him to, and he feels indebted to his uncle? And it's like, it almost like there's this conflict of interest. Where it's like, okay, wait, why is he completely doing this on a certain level? Because it wasn't completely clear what the driving motive was. So, I mean, obviously he's not doing it for his wife because he's working against her family, where he's like helping get them killed. But it's like, okay, what is like? Is he actually doing this for himself, or is he doing this because of his uncle? Like, what is the what are the like? I felt like that wasn't fully developed.
So yeah, and like you said, Ernest is the most interesting, definitely one of the most interesting characters in this movie, and he's a little bit of a simpleton, right? So one, he states his primary motivations early on in the movie. One, he likes money and he likes women, right? And those are his two things that he says he's interested in. And then when he's pushed on the women part, especially when they realize that Molly's available, Ernest isn't gonna go, "Oh yeah, the big talk that he was saying earlier wasn't so hot. That okay, yeah, maybe I do go for women, but I'm not just gonna go after her." But as he hangs out with her more, he actually does decide he's interested in her. So there's there's a difference between what you say and what you do. What you do indicated to me that his other primary motivating factor was a woman, and specifically it was Molly. And what I chalked it up to was he was such a simpleton that he wasn't making basic connections. Like, oh, I might be poisoning my own wife until the very end. Or,
well, yeah, he's definitely manipulated.
I like killing your family, the family of my wife, really is not a good idea, until he kills the last sister. Was it Anna? No, it was Maddie. I forget the
Anya, Rita, yes,
yeah, the younger one. Where it's like, hold on, this is because you see it in his face where he goes, this was a lot, so I what I chalk it up to is he had two conflicting values, and they weren't originally conflicting. He wanted a wife, and he wanted money. And at first he goes, "Oh, I can just have both, because if I am the inheritor of this wealth, then I will make all this money." And then as he goes further and further down this path, he realizes, wait a second, these two things can't coexist. I can't kill these people and still love my wife. I can't, and he's already driven so far down the road that by the time he realizes it, in some ways, it's too late. And that's part of him being an absolute buffoon. But it's the path that he goes down. That's what I chalked it up to.
Yeah, I could see that. No, and I kind of agree with that a little bit. I mean, in a way, he is very easily persuaded, manipulated.
Right.
Like there are several scenes where it's like people just talk to him persuasively, and he changes his mind. And so yeah, it's like he's definitely a simpleton. He
Yeah.
takes things at face value, and he doesn't fully realize like what people are manipulating him, like people are getting him to do. Like he doesn't realize he's poisoning his wife. He thinks he's giving her insulin, like for her
Right.
diabetes. He doesn't realize it isn't until later on, like almost at the end of the movie, that some connections are made, and it's like, oh, you're poisoning her.
Yeah. And
So,
he realizes, oh shoot, this,
mm,
this thing that I'm adding to make it worse might not be the best, and he adds it to his own, water or liquor or whatever he's drinking, and
mm,
sits in a disillusioned state on the chair as she's you know starting to pass in front of him. So
mm,
it's they definitely, and I don't know if this part is true or not. Based on what I read, it's speculated, but whether or not he actually cared for his wife is questionable. Based on the story, I think it's pretty safe to say that he had some feelings there, and even the end draws that into some question. But
mm.
it's a tough spot he's put himself in. Um,
Mm.
yeah. Did you feel like the who did you think the villain was?
Yeah, Robert De Niro. So,
Robert De Niro is the villain. Oh my
yep,
gosh. Why? No,
yeah,
also as a side note, you have seen, cuz I know you were curious about this when we watched it in the theaters. You have seen some of Robert De Niro's. Well, I'm sure you've seen Robert De Niro, but Martin Scorsese's movies, including, I don't know if you've seen The Wolf of Wall Street or not. I have. Was Shutter Island, The Departed, Aviator, Cape Fear, um, Casino, The Taxi Driver. Uh, what are some other good ones that he's done? He's done a lot
I
of
don't
very
know.
very popular movies.
Well, I know
Silence,
he's
The
done a lot of.
Irishman, Hugo, um,
I've
Shutter
seen bits of
Island.
Hugo. I don't know if
So
I've. Yeah, Martin Scorsese is just one of those directors I've somehow managed to avoid, like, miss a lot of his movies. I don't know how, but
okay,
it's just when one of those directors I've only seen a little bit of.
well that's fine. I mean, I haven't seen all of them. I've seen a couple. So
Hmm.
it's interesting because, well, by the end, well, the ending really threw me off. So I wasn't sure if those were just Quentin Tarantino vibes I was getting, or if that was just something that he does. And then I looked at the other movies I've seen, and like, I haven't seen this before. Maybe I've just watched the wrong ones, but this isn't. I don't know. Anyways, we'll get to that. But so the villain, so if the main character, and I guess villain maybe isn't the right word, but like the antagonist probably would be a better word. The antagonist in some ways is the FBI, in some ways is the Osage Nation, because if the main character is Ernest, those are the people he's going up against. So it was kind of convoluted, especially because he was convoluted
I mean,
himself.
I guess it depends on what you say. Is like, I don't know. I feel like in a way, like William Hale is still the villain because he's manipulating Ernest to do what he wants him to do.
Sure,
So
and I
I
put him
would
down
say,
as like a option for sure.
mm, so
I guess I'm just not fully convinced that he is the only opponent to what, and I'm not even sure that that I'm convinced that that King is the antagonist to Ernest, because Ernest says early on in the movie, "I want money," and the King is all about that, so he's all about supporting that. And he might be a bad man having bad ways of supporting that, but he's all about supporting that. So it I I do agree he's a bad man, but is he the antagonist to the main character? I don't think so. Um but maybe I
mm,
guess you could say he is at the end when he turns against him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It honestly,
I
it's
just feel like in the overarching arc of the story, he is the villain because at the end he turns against him, and like it wasn't until the end that Ernest realizes that it was Hale, his uncle, who like put him in this position, and it's like because he was following his uncle's words, his advice, his commands, he's now in this position and is full of regret. And it's like it's not
right.
until then that he realizes you are the person who brought me to this point. It's because of you that I'm now in this difficult situation. So
Right. And he
so so I mean he's
yeah,
not overtly the villain for most of the movie, but by the end
oh,
it's clear he is. So like
right.
it's
I
like
mean,
this subtle thing that's throughout the movie. So
yeah, no, and he's
and
a
it
bad
works
man.
because
So
Ernest is a simpleton. Like he doesn't question things like he should. And when so it's like he's easily manipulated and it's like kind of hidden from him a little bit.
yeah, I mean,
So
that doesn't give him a pass just because he's a simpleton.
yeah.
Um
Well no, I'm not saying it gives him a pass. I'm just so it doesn't
yeah,
say that Ernest was a good guy. He wasn't. He did some bad things.
no, ultimately I think the biggest thing that struck me just because especially because it has those two sections of the movie is that
Hmm.
the biggest enemy of Ernest is himself because he's the one who's ultimately taking these actions that
Hmm.
support his greedy motives. And he seeks out the counsel of people um, like King, excuse me, who tell him to do these bad things. And you even see a contrast to that when King drives up to the local bar and says to the one guy, "Hey, you're going to be accused of this. I would get out of here if I would." And the guy says, "Thank you, but you're not my friend. I don't trust you. I'm not going to
Hmm.
listen to your advice. I'm going to stay here." And
Hmm.
that emphasizes the idea that you can take your own action, you can be your own autonomous individual, and Ernest chooses not to be. And
Hmm.
he might be an easier, more trusting individual compared to other people, but that doesn't give him an excuse. Is there anything that, well, okay, let's just talk about the ideals or the revelations. You said there was no revelations. I didn't really see any either,
Hmm.
so we can move on from there. Uh, does the main character, does he stand for anything? I guess he stands for greed. We already talked about that. Does he
Yeah.
stand for anything else? Kind of talked about that a little bit too.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean maybe selfishness. I don't know.
right. So
I
ultimately,
mean
does he grow as a person? Maybe that's the bigger question. Is
in
he
a
better
way,
off
he
for
grows
this?
a little bit, I'd say, by the end of the movie because he begins to realize at the end how his actions led him to this point, and he realizes, like, and he's full, and admits that he's full of regret and that he just wants to get rid of the regret at this point. So
Right.
that's why he becomes a witness at the trial because he's done and realizes he needs to do better. And so in a way, he's trying to fix what he's done by being a witness. Now, he's not. It doesn't solve everything, and it's still like he still like has some issues, but it's like a very small attempt at trying to fix things that he did wrong.
So I agree, sort of. Um, but I actually did give him anything for this on this
Okay.
movie, and so the reason is because that ending bit, right, where you're sitting with Ernest and he's sitting there with his wife and she asks like, "What did you give me?" And he's not the smartest chip off the block, but he knows at that point that what was giving her probably wasn't insulin, probably wasn't helping her, and
Hmm.
when he realizes that, he should have fessed up. Like if he really valued his wife, like he said he did, and he was willing to give up all opportunity to stand against his uncle and have the benefit of that lawyer and all that stuff, uh he should have stood against, like, basically he had the opportunity to stand with his uncle, have all the professional lawyers, all that stuff, or be an expert witness against his uncle and testify against him. And he decided he would choose his wife and testify against his uncle. But then when he faces his wife, he goes, "Oh, I just gave you insulin. It was just insulin." Even though he knows it's not insulin. And so he lies to his wife right after the hearing. And it almost, it
Well, did he
feels like
even
a
know it wasn't
reversal.
insulin at that point? Because I got the impression in that scene, like he starts to realize in that scene that maybe he didn't give her insulin, like, and that's like almost like a revelation in that moment to him.
I mean, I think
So I mean, I
you
don't
can
know. Like, there's a
get,
part of me
sure.
that wonders that if like, because he probably didn't think about it too much before that, and it's almost like in that
Well,
scene when she asks him that, it's like it's almost like she catches him off guard. It's like, I actually don't know what I gave you now,
I
but
mean,
he
but
still
then,
says insulin.
right. Well, that's the thing. Like,
So and
even if
so,
that's true,
mhm,
which I don't think it's true, because he
mhm,
clearly tasted it for himself to test what it was. So he wasn't convinced that he was giving her insulin, and he knew he was adding stuff which definitely wasn't insulin to the
mhm,
mix. So even if he still was coming to that realization in that moment, right? The right answer in that moment is not to say, "Oh yeah, 100%, I was doing the right thing here because you got sick and got worse, and now you're better because you're off it." I don't think it adds up. I personally, I felt like that scene destroyed his character arc, and that was my biggest
hmm.
beef with it. Is you took 3.5 hours to take this terrible man down a terrible journey that made him a worse man, and then at the end, when he finally realizes he's done something wrong, he decides to do what he can to make it right. And then when he looks his wife in the eyes, he goes back to lying. And it makes him just as not just as despicable, but pretty despicable compared to where he was
Mhm.
before.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's my 2 cents. That's and for that reason, I'm out. um, but did the movie have a theme? What did you think about the themes of the movie?
The movie does have a theme where it's almost like greed and selfishness can destroy the lives of the, like, not only your life but the lives of the people you care about, and just like, because in a way it shows the progression where it's like her whole Molly's family is slowly destroyed by the greed of Hale's family and of Ernest's family. It's just like and it's not until the end that, and even Ernest loses everything by the end of it because he sides with her, and like he doesn't actually gain anything in the result. Like his actions in the end take away everything.
And his uncle
So,
even is prophesying that in a way where he goes, "Yeah, they promised you this, but they'll get you on other things, and he does get charged by the other murders, even though he
mm-hmm,
wasn't charged for the family direct murders. So
mm-hmm,
he does spend time in jail. Yeah, he loses everything, and yeah, greed is definitely probably what I would say. Greed leads to its own downfall. Be sure your sins will find you out. Don't trust the FBI when they give you a bail option. I don't know. Anyways, all right. So the ending. Did the movie leave you satisfied, dissatisfied, ambivalent? Where did it leave you?
I guess for me, I wasn't completely satisfied with this movie.
Mhm.
Maybe I was more on the unsatisfied side than anything, and maybe it's because there isn't a whole lot of redeeming qualities about this movie. It's very much. I mean, now it kind of has to be in some regards, where it's like showing the downfall of certain characters, but at the same time, it is very. Like the ending is kind of depressing and dark in a certain way, where it's like you don't. This is not a happy ending. This is like a lot of people get hurt, a lot of people died, and in the end, it almost gives the impression that justice isn't fully carried out. Whereas like some murders like aren't fully recognized. Like some things
Mhm.
just it like gives you this impression that like it's just a very depressing sort of way to end a movie. So
Yeah.
I just didn't like how they ended it. So
Well,
I mean,
especially because
I'm not even talking about the radio show thing. Like that was
yeah, okay,
weird,
okay, yeah.
but like and that I thought like I'm not even I didn't like that, but I didn't even factor into my score. Like I was just like that's just a weird creative director choice or whatever. But um yeah, in a weird way, it felt like him trying to insert himself into his own movie.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
Well, that's why I was saying it was almost like a like not like a Quentin Tarantino thing, where Quentin Tarantino shows up in his own movie to drink the tequila off the lady's foot, or he narrates over his own movie in The Hateful Eight, or any number of weird things that he does. It's like, what are you doing here? This was one of those scenes where you show up and you go, okay, I mean, odd, but
yeah.
I guess we're going with it.
Uh, oh man. But yeah, the ending. I mean, even discounting that, I felt like the ending just it wasn't satisfying to me
Hmm.
personally. So
Right.
I really didn't give it much points for the ending. So
No, I mean, same. I felt that I almost think that if they had ended the movie right at when Ernest tells on his uncle, that would have been a good ending.
hmm
And now, granted, it wouldn't be 100% accurate to what actually happened, right? Because
hmm.
he obviously King goes to jail, William Hale goes to jail, but then also Ernest goes to jail too. And if you ended it right there, then it wouldn't show, oh, Ernest and Molly got divorced and Ernest goes to jail for a lot of his life and all these other
Hmm.
things that actually happened. So it
Hmm.
wouldn't be quite as accurate. But in regards to showing his arc as a character and demonstrating the value of a changed man, that ending it right there would have made a much bigger difference.
Yeah. So I mean, if anything, that ending it only cements more in my mind that this movie probably should have been a documentary exploring these events and what happened in this town, as opposed to this narrative story, or maybe done like a documentary with some like acted out segments, like because you could have done that, but it's
Uh-huh.
just like I feel like it would have been much better as a movie if you had done it gone that route.
Right. Yeah,
So
especially
also
because he was
simplifying
trying
and
to.
like cutting down on screen time
Yeah,
because it didn't deserve to be 3.5 hours long. That was
yeah.
excessive.
Just like so many scenes that were unnecessarily dragged out, or like I said,
Mm.
they described the murders and then they showed the murders as separate sections. Why? Don't know. We're watching this as a movie, so just do one or the other. Anyways, yeah, I was unsatisfied. I wish they could have done so much better. And I just don't think they did. So that's why it's a 6 for me.
Mm.
That's The
Actually, I think
Killers of the Flower Moon.
my score just went down actually over the course of this
So
discussion.
yeah, that's the question. Did you change? What is your rating at this point?
It's actually roughly a solid 5 now. It used to be 5.4, but I think I just dropped it a few points to 5 because
Uh huh.
you made some valid points.
I'm gonna leave it at 6. I really want to drop it half a point for the midpoint about the heightened tension. Did they keep it heightened?
Mm.
They did so well at the end that I was pretty hooked once people started dropping dead.
Well, once the court case,
Before
like
that,
FBI got involved, it
oh,
became
for
really
sure.
tense. Where it's like now there was actually potential consequences for these murders and what was going on, and they were actually in the town. They were actually investigating and looking into things. So there
Yeah,
was actual potential consequences for the actions of Ernest and Hale.
absolutely. So there was a lot going on then, and it was definitely I was very engaged.
Hmm.
So I still give it the 2 points for that section, but it's still a 6. 6 is a good rating. It's an interesting movie. It's worth a watch, I'd say. I
Hmm.
will probably not watch it again. That's that. And that's the pod. We hope you all enjoyed. We will see you all back here next time. Until then.